I want to bring in now Peter Hartcher, the political editor of the Sydney Morning Herald and international affairs editor as well. Thanks for joining us, Peter. Let's start on the big political debate with Parliament back on tax cuts. And we just heard from Anthony Albanese too that this afternoon's latest interest rate cut from the Reserve Bank cannot be ignored in the context of this debate. He's essentially saying the Reserve Bank is sending the siren call here that the economy's in trouble. Is that what the Reserve Bank's doing?
Yes, it is. The Reserve Bank, by not only making the first cut last month and the second cut this month without waiting to see either the economy's response to the first cut or what the fate of this tax cut bill is in the Parliament, tells you that they've made a decision that we are at an emphatic inflection point in the cycle. They think that the two rate cuts plus the tax cut that the government is proposing is still not necessarily adequate, because they've said today they'll continue to cut rates again if they think the unemployment rate is not responding. So the Reserve Bank has got its pedal flat to the floor and thinks that plus the government's tax cuts may still not be enough. And
look, there are dangers, obviously, and risks in doing this, because then you're not left with much room to move. If something really bad happens with the global economy that impacts on us, they don't have much further to go.
Yeah, precisely. And you know the old adage, David, that the time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining. Australia's had 10 years of sunshine when the rest of the world's been reeling and recovering from the global financial crisis. We are now heading potentially, I mean, it's too hard to tell just now, but if the trade war between the US and China continues to deteriorate, and so far that's been the trajectory, then we could well be heading into another global crisis. We could be well be heading into a situation where Australia's federal budget is still not in surplus. Remember, the government went into the election telling us it was in surplus. It's not. They've promised it will be. Yeah. It's a promise on a piece of paper called a budget, and with interest rates that have never recovered anywhere near pre-crisis lows. So Australia's spent all the fiscal ammunition and almost all the monetary ammunition already while we're still in a boom.
Now, this brings us to the debate around the immediate tax cuts. It's very hard to imagine that one way or another by the end of this week, at least the immediate tax cuts won't be passed by Parliament. But tactically, there's quite a game going on. Anthony Albanese just telling us, look, they will allow it through the House tonight. They'll, in fact, if they have to, vote in favour of it for that to happen, but then leaving open what they do in the Senate in a couple of days when the debate is held there. What do you think about Labor's approach to this?
I think they're trying to find a face-saving way of letting the government have its will and not be seen to be standing in between the great Australian voting public and a tax cut. Yeah. I think that's what this is about. This is about trying to make some plausible objections, some plausible amendments, while at the same time slowly backing towards the door, backing away from the argument.
And it may not be a bad idea, the argument, the stage 2 tax cut should be brought forward and implemented right now. I mean, given what's going on in the economy, maybe that's not a bad idea. But they're in opposition. They can't call the shots on something like that.
That's right. So they can and should, in fact, a responsible opposition should raise suggestions, make constructive suggestions and debate the concepts. But as you say, it's a quixotic argument. They're bound to lose. So they're probably doing the smartest thing, which is to let it go while putting up a spirited defence.
Yeah, well, we'll see where it ends up by the end of the week. Hugh White, we were just talking to Professor White about his book, How to Defend Australia, in which he's mounted, well, I guess, quite a frightening prospect that the US may not come to our aid, come to our defence in the event of an attack on Australia. We need to start planning for that now by dramatically ramping up our defence spending and even considering nuclear weapons. What do you think of his analysis on this?
I think he's a one-man wake-up call to Australia. He's a provocateur for a pretty sleepy, somnolent system. Our defence and foreign affairs system is pretty much a groupthink enterprise, and Hugh does us a favour when he comes in and pokes us and says, well, hang on, what about this? So that's his role in the system. He's done that over the years effectively, and he's a bit of a national treasure in that sense, that he's prepared to challenge the orthodoxy. Good on you, Hugh. I also happen to think that his main contentions are right. That if there had been a time when we could have relied on the US to come to our rescue in the event that we actually needed them, and bear in mind the only times Australia's ever asked for the ANZUS Treaty to be invoked, the US has said no. Most recently was during the Timor crisis. Then that time is no longer, if it ever did exist. We see Donald Trump's very cavalier, sometimes insulting treatment of allies. Are you prepared to gamble your national fate and the security of your country on the whim of Donald Trump?
And look, Hugh's point too is that, put Trump to one side, there's clearly a sentiment across the American polity right now that they want to step back from being the global policeman.
This is the other big favour that Hugh White does Australia with this debate, with his book, is that he tells us, no, it's not just enough to look at Trump and slap your forehead and get worked up about it.
And think, oh, this will all be gone eventually.
That's right. This is not a passing storm. This is we've crossed a threshold. Trump, at the last election, did cross the threshold where he politicised US alliances, which has not been done since they started, since World War II. Not only has he done that, but he's then formed a new orthodoxy, which relegates US leadership and dominance in the Pacific to a second or third order issue and makes it, in effect, a disposable matter for the US. So I think he's quite right on those major tenets.
But nuclear weapons?
Well, as he says, he walks Australia right up to the brink on this and says we should think about it, but we have to debate it, but we don't necessarily have to do it.
He even says we shouldn't be the first to do it.
Yes.
In the region. Because, I mean, we see it time and again, don't we? The sort of nuclear arms race is not something we want to necessarily encourage.
No, you don't want to be the destabilising force. But the problem there with Hugh taking it that far and not the final step, he's saying let's debate it but don't actually do it, is that he's saying that we cannot rely on the US to protect us in a conventional attack. So if we can't rely on them in a conventional attack, why should we continue to rely on them for extended nuclear deterrence? At the moment, the only reason we don't have nuclear weapons, David, is because we've trusted the Americans will wield them for us, right? So if he's saying we can't trust them on this level, but we should keep trusting them on this level, I'm not quite sure how you reconcile those two. I think he's been prepared to be provocative, but doesn't want to be completely outrageous.